And Wichita is so honored to have Mr. Redditt Hudson here.
I'm glad to be here today, and I want us to really value the opportunity that we have in this brief space to talk, and then beyond talking, prepare to take action, proactive steps to improve the police-community relationships, not just here in Wichita, but across the country. I'm a former St. Louis police officer. I've been shot at enforcing the laws of the state of Missouri. I know how dangerous the job is. But we are in a crisis nationally, and it's going to take our collective will, our collective bipartisan will, to make the changes necessary going forward. So I hope to be as candid with you as I'm capable of, and I would ask the same for you, and I hope in the space that we have after my remarks, which I want to leave plenty of time for, we can engage each other with questions or statements and a dialogue that moves us forward. But I'm going to maybe set the frame for you now, based on my own experience, not just as a police officer, but as an advocate. When I was at the ACLU, there was a young man we took on as a client. His name was Anthony Collins. He came to us with a complaint of an assault by police officers one night in St. Louis. And I asked him to describe what happened to me, and he told me what happened. And I remember after he told me what happened, our executive director and myself and others made a decision to take his case on. And I had to interview him because he was going to be out of the state for a period of time. And I had to interview him so that we had a record. It wasn't a deposition because I'm not an attorney. We did have many attorneys then at the ACLU. We still do, or they still do. But we had to get his statement on record, and I did. And what he had complained of was that driving in the city of St. Louis one night, the police had apparently set up a random DUI stop. These stops, many of you in law enforcement in the room know that you can set them up anywhere, and you pull people over, whoever is in the traffic stream. No one is exempted. You herd them over to where you have the station set up, and you run your checks. And Anthony got caught in this stop. He was en route somewhere, and he wasn't clear what the officer wanted him to do. He was still in his vehicle, and the officer was gesturing and motioning at him, and he wasn't clear what he wanted him to do. He started, I guess, heading towards him, but at some point he made the decision to get out of his vehicle and approach the officer because he wanted to be clear about what he wanted him to do. He wanted to follow his directive, whatever it is, because he needed to get someplace, so he wanted to be clear. He got out of his car, and the officer immediately began cursing him, "Get back in your fill-in-the-blank car. I didn't tell you to get out of the car." And Anthony said, "But sir, I need to find out what it is you want me to do. I don't understand." "Get back in the blanket car." And the exchange escalates. The officer approaches him, and before you know it, he's physically engaged Anthony. He's taken him down, he's maced him, and I think another officer joined in. And so Anthony was in distress. Mace burned in his eyes, causing him to choke. He still wasn't clear about what he was supposed to have done. And they stand there for a while over him, and he stands up and gets himself together. A supervisor responds to the scene. And at some point, a decision is made because they were going to charge Anthony with assault on an officer and resisting arrest. But at some point, when the supervisor shows up, a decision is made to release him and let him go on his way. And I think we all understood at some point that the reason that decision was made, because in stopping Anthony, who was not drunk and who had violated no laws, and assaulting him that way, they had caused him to miss a flight back to Iraq for his second tour of duty in the United States Army. The videotape that we made of his statement is overwhelming. To hear him describe how he believes he's never had any rights that were recognized in this country, particularly by the police. To hear him talk about how his mother had been harassed her entire life by police officers. This is an African-American young man who is as sharp as they come, who is in service to his country, who was willing to put his life on the line for us, and who comes home and tells me in no uncertain terms, man, I don't even feel like a citizen here. Fast forward, I live 10 minutes from where Michael Brown was killed. 10 minutes. Much has been made in the aftermath of that case about police-community relations, the vilification of police officers, criminality in the black community. I hope to talk about all of that briefly and densely in the very short time that I have allotted. But to get to the root of the issue, you have to understand that what we're seeing now is not new. It isn't new. It is just now coming to mainstream attention because it's being recorded. And objective records are being made of the interactions between police and community members that have never been made before. And when Michael Brown got killed, he got killed in Ferguson. Let me tell you a little bit about Ferguson, because I live adjacent to that community. I live in a community called Florissant, but the Ferguson-Florissant district is a consolidated district. Some years back in Ferguson, there was a man who was stopped wrongfully, wrong identification. Officer thought he was somebody else. He pulls him over, he gets the guy out of the car, and the guy immediately understands that this is a misidentification. I'm not the guy you're looking for, and he tries to explain that to the officer. The officer curses him, slams him down, puts the cuffs on him, takes him in, and disregards his attempt at an explanation. They get him to the station, and the man continues to plead his innocence. And at some point, the booking officer, I think, realized that they did in fact have the wrong person and said, I think we have a problem, but they persisted and wanted to put him in a cell. And as he offered his final attempt to state his innocence, when they want to put him in the cell, they attack. These officers, 4 of them, they cuff him up, they take him in the cell, they beat him, they kick him in the head. He's a bloody, bloody mess. At some point, it is established that he is the wrong guy, but now they've assaulted him in the cell. What do? They charge him. What did they charge him with? This is in Ferguson now. Remember, I'm establishing a history. What did they charge him with? Destruction of property. What was the property that was subject to the destruction of this subject? They said, and this was the charge, that he bled on their uniform. I promise you it's the truth. They charged him with bleeding on their uniforms after they beat him savagely. I gave a talk sometime after Mike Brown was killed, and it was a Know Your Rights workshop. At this workshop, as it concluded, an older gentleman came up to me and related the story to me, and then I'll get into what I really want to talk about. I just want to set a foundation. Related the story to me that he was a younger man, maybe 30 years ago now. He was moving from one apartment to another in a community. And he started taking his furniture from the apartment, loading it onto the truck, whatever. Police officer pulls up on him, black guy, the guy who was unloading the furniture. Police officer pulls up on him and asks him what he's doing, whose furniture is this, or whatever. And he explains to him, this is my furniture, I'm moving it from this apartment, I'm gonna be moving to an apartment not too far from here, so I'll be doing this all day. Just so you know, I don't want you to think I'm taking anything. These are all my belongings. Officer says, okay. Some hours later, sun is going down, it's getting a little dark, starts to rain. He's getting the last of his furniture moved into the new place. Same officer approaches him, rapid approach. Pulls up, tire skid, jumps out of the car, comes to him, puts him down, face first in the mud, puts a gun to his head, and is threatening him that, you know, it's a problem with you and me. He recognized him finally, I guess, or if he recognized him at all, I don't know. And he's released without charges. But where that took place was in Canfield Green. That's where Mike Brown was killed, Canfield Green. That's how the interaction has been for all of these years now. That's the experience. So when you finally see a Mike Brown gunned down in Canfield Green and left in the middle of the street for 4 hours, and the community out and engulfed in a kind of overwhelming combination of rage and sadness and disbelief, there's a foundation for it. This didn't just happen overnight. So if I could relate anything to you today that is important about serious work on a police-community relationship, it has to do with first acknowledging the history of policing in these United States. And I'm not saying that all police are bad. I'm not saying that. There are many good men and women in this work trying to do a very difficult job. But what I am saying is if you want to begin to build trust between police and communities across the country, there has to be some accountability, because in each of the cases that I just described to you and the ones that I could describe that are even worse, historically there has been virtually zero accountability for the officers responsible for those kinds of abuses of black and brown bodies. Zero, and that has been advocated, unfortunately, by too many of our colleagues in law enforcement who want zero accountability and test or try anybody that's calling for any level of accountability by trying to label them anti-police. That's not true. It's absolutely not true. Most of the people that I know in black and brown communities across this country are pro-police, but they're pro-accountable policing. We don't want to see Eric Garner murdered in front of us as he pleads for his life, only to have those officers not only not held accountable, but become boastful about it. I sat next to his daughter on the TD Jake show, and I remember I had to put my hand on her leg as they ran the videotape yet again, showing her father. I'm sitting right next to her in his last moments of life. I don't know if you can imagine it, man, but let yourself imagine it. Because as a police officer, I know I've had dangerous encounters, I've had physical encounters. If I put you in what we used to call the carotid neck restraint, right? Which is that rear naked chokehold, basically, and you announce to me that you can't breathe, you know what I can do? I can stop choking you, especially if it's 4 of us and we have the subject under control. I can stop. So that history has to be acknowledged. That history has to be remade. And when you hear people talk like myself, and I'm getting ready to talk about some issues in the black community while it's on my mind, but when you hear people like myself talk about institutional racism or systemic racism as we see it at the foundation of our criminal justice system, it is not just me. Trust me, I'm representative of a growing number of law enforcement people across this country who are committed to addressing exactly that. That doesn't mean that every white person in my presence here is officially under indictment for all the wrong that's been done to black people. That's not what that means, man. You know why it doesn't mean that? Because it's not any individual person's fault in here that we have to address these conditions, because they pre-exist us. We were born into this reality. This was the setup long before anybody in this room got here. Our responsibility is to acknowledge the history and the reality and then work to make the changes necessary so that equal treatment under the law is a reality for us and not just a narrative, a reality. The flip side of the equation is what's going on in our own communities. equally difficult to talk about. And a lot of people in the black community, in the black progressive community, sometimes vilify those who would call out the violence in our own community. Now, let me make an important distinction here. As a response to our forceful move to end police brutality in our communities, as a response to me saying that I don't think Alton Sterling deserved to be shot to death like that, if as a response to that it is, yeah, but what about the crime in black communities? What about all those kids killing black kids? I flat out reject that, because they're two different things. In no way does the crime in my community absolve this criminal over here for the crime he's committed. However, as an important issue that we do have to come to grips with, when you look at what's going on in Chicago, when you look at what's going on in St. Louis, which was just recently, again, achieved the notorious title of most dangerous city in America, and it is dangerous, we do have to look at what is going on in our communities, because I can't discount anyone's death, no matter how it was caused. And I'm encouraged that there are more conscious young people waking up to the fact that, hey man, while we decry this injustice over here and the end result of it, we're producing some of the same results on our own, in our own community. And that's a conversation we need to have, and steps need to be taken in the black community. Absolutely. And one of the things that can be done in advance of setting the room for a meaningful dialogue between communities of color and police departments that serve them is for, rather than each side, as it has been tradition, pointing the finger at the other side and saying, it's all your fault. It's all your fault. Well, let's try this. Let's go within our community and first acknowledge what we've contributed to the breakdown in the relationship mutually, and come to the table ready to acknowledge, okay, this is where we've come up short. This is where we've come up short. And then you may have a foundation for real trust, because as I was speaking with the officer here just before I started, one of the most important things you can do, because there will be critical incidents. There will be use of force encounters. There will be. But one of the most important things that you can do is build a relationship in advance of the critical incident. If there's a foundation of trust there, because I know you, because I trust you, because we've had some dialogue, because I've seen your real commitment to valuing my humanity and dignity consistently across the board, and you've seen my commitment to respecting the law and obeying the law across the board, you have a better basis if something does happen for you to be trusted and heard, as opposed to discounted and dismissed, because all you do ever is justify any and everything that happens. One of the pet peeves that I have, because I am on the national stage from time to time, but I see others who are on it, one of the pet peeves that I have is unconditional apologies for anybody, no matter what they've done. Pat Lynch, New York City Police Union president, behind Eric Garner's death, has his officers turn their backs on the mayor of New York because he had the nerve to talk to his biracial kids about how they might need to interact with the police, as if that's unreality. And rather than engage on what we know to be the case, here's a city that has settled $1 billion with a B in wrongful use of force, police abused authority, $1 billion in about the last 10 years. Rather than engage on the issue, you lock down on the narrative that, hey, don't you ever question anything we do. We put our lives on the line. We go to that narrative of risk, sacrifice, and heroism, and shut down everybody that ever challenges our conduct. And it's no good anymore, because now we see. 5 minutes and I'm gonna open, because I really do value this opportunity to engage and talk to you about what we can do. But this idea, man, that somehow Black Lives Matter, President Obama kicked off anti-police sentiment in the country. Oh man, no, stop it. This has been going on for years, generations deep. The kinds of abuses that I described to you, and I could regale you with abuses until the sun goes down. Set the foundation for what is erupting in front of you right now. There's no individual or no brand new movement that did this. There was a tipping point. And now, really, what these young people have done is given us a real opportunity to address some real issues. The reality on the ground is what it is. We have that opportunity to move beyond old ways of interacting with each other, to move beyond the idea that every police encounter with a person of color has got to be a punitive encounter, or you haven't done your job, to embrace community policing, which has proven to be, when it is invested in by the rank and file officers on the street, a good way to start to build relationships in communities. We have that opportunity, but it can quickly escape us if we just retreat to our camps and lock in on our preferred narratives and points of view and exclude all else, even when objective reality flies in the face of some of the positions that we take. We have to be ready to take that one step forward. And I know it's hard, man. I know, nobody wants to be vilified and nobody wants to be demonized unfairly. And you shouldn't be. And I'm not saying you specifically, I'm speaking in broad terms. But people on the side of this issue that may have a different opinion than I do should not be demonized wholesale. So I'm ready to talk, I'm ready to listen, and I'm ready to talk about some things that can be done going forward. I'll throw out a few while I still have the mic before we talk. First thing, accountability. Nothing matters. Nothing else works if you don't have accountability at the root of it. If there is no punishment for officers who, in Eric Garner's case, violate their own policy to choke him out. If there's no punishment or accountability for those officers, no amount of training, no amount of policy, no amount of anything matters. If officers don't care about what they do and there is no consequence for it. I'm a big proponent of body cameras, although much to, unfortunately, no one's surprise, many departments are moving to pass legislation or work with legislators to pass laws that restrict public access to body cam footage. What do you think that does to the trust level? If you know that an objective record can be created by this tool, so now what we have to do is move to hide it. What do you think that does to trust? And what do you think that does to the public sense of police motivation? Special prosecutors could be useful. Mr. DA, I know you're here, but I have to tell you the history that I've seen and my colleagues have seen around this country is that necessarily, there has to be a relationship between DAs and police because they work together all the time, generally speaking. Rare is the case where the DA has to now turn and look at the officer as the criminal, and I think those relationships are too strong and too problematic for us not to, in cases of critical incidents, especially use of force involving death, have a special prosecutor in place. We don't have enough time for me to go into Michael Brown's case, but trust me, we interviewed some of those witnesses. I interviewed a couple of those witnesses. And Darren Wilson could have been indicted. You need to know that. Had the prosecutor, Robert McCulloch, wanted an indictment, he could have got an indictment, but he didn't. And I think personally that has much to do with his relationship with law enforcement on the ground in St. Louis. Grand juries. In cases involving use of force that result in death, eliminate them. Get rid of them. It's a buffer, ultimately, that is used by prosecutors to shield the public from facts that may be damning to officers in many cases, and steer grand juries toward a desired result. We just had one of the grand jurors on the McCulloch grand jury sue him. Sue him. And this guy, from what I understand, I think is an attorney. Sued him for misconducting the grand jury in a set of facts similar to what I'm telling you in the Mike case. So I'll be quiet. I do respect my colleagues and friends that remain in law enforcement. I have a number of them. They call and engage me all the time, mostly good, sometimes not. But I know you do have a difficult job to do. The community has a difficult life to live. And I think if we come together around real issues and not talking points, we can get somewhere. So with that, I open the floor, and please, no question is off limits.
Sir, thank you for being here. And I think that the real topic is the devaluation of human life. People just aren't like we used to be maybe 50 years ago before Roe v. Wade and abortion. Right now, while we sit here, there's probably 2 black babies being ripped apart at the abortion clinic down the road here on Kellogg and Oliver. There's probably 1 white one and probably 1 Hispanic one. More black people are killed at the abortion clinics in this country. And I agree with you that we can't devalue one, say well, this life is important, but that one's not. And do you think that we can solve this problem of the devaluation of human life without solving the abortion problem first?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that leads to a resolution of the problem as you describe it, but given that you've made the statement that you did make, am I comfortable in assuming now that you would go with me if I needed you to call for police accountability in case of police murder of unarmed blacks?
Absolutely.
And let me throw something out. Let this sink in. I'm glad you let this sink in, man. And I mean, let it sink to the core of you. We've seen just regular, I'll say regular, shootings of unarmed black men around the country. Some may be justified, others I don't think so, but regular. In St. Louis, Missouri, the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department that I work for started hiring blacks in significant, meaningful numbers around the late 60s, early 70s in numbers. So from that point until now is almost half a century. That's men and women on patrol in St. Louis, most dangerous city in the world, 24 hours a day, around the clock, 3 shifts, 7 days a week, every week, 30 or 31 days a month, continuous in service. They're in service now as we speak, 365 days a year for half a century. And neither me nor any of my former colleagues or current officers can think of a single black officer that has ever shot at an unarmed white person in half a century. Ever. More than that, we can't think of a single black officer, we have to maybe do some research, that has ever shot at a white person, period. Half a century. That's a long time. And there's some dangerous people of all races in St. Louis, and they do have encounters with the police. let that, reflect on that in quiet time someplace, if you ever want to think about the context for which you see this outrage, and this growing outrage among law enforcement officers. As an officer down in Dallas, where those officers were killed protecting those demonstrators, when that happened, it was tragic. I think it hit us all, and it should. Those are human beings. They were in service. They had families. They have children. Of course, we grieved them. But I thought that there was a missed opportunity on the part of the chief of police of Dallas when he came to that press conference and said, you know, in order to fix the police-community relationship, we just need the community to understand that we're heroes and we are, you know, worthy of their respect at all times, no matter what. But that's not always the case. And now you have a lieutenant in that same department, in the same Dallas Police Department, who has gone public and said we have major problems with this department and across the country with use of force in black communities. Same department, same training, same people. But if we cannot get to the point where it's okay for you as an officer, let's say, to call out your colleague when you see him tase the guy repeatedly. There's an audio tape that me and Adolphus Pruitt, the president of the St. Louis City NAACP list, listened to, where a guy is audio taped tasering a subject repeatedly, and he finally dies. The family came to us because their father and brother was dead because his officer tased him like 9 or 10 times, and on the audio you hear the officer saying, put your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back. And I guess he's tasing the guy periodically because he can't get his hands behind his back. A, when you get tasered, it's debilitating and it becomes much more difficult to comply. You know that. But B, as it turned out, the guy was about as tall as me, and semantics, what he was telling the guy did have his hands behind his back. What he wanted him to do was move them higher, like this. And the guy couldn't understand that that's what he wanted him to do. He couldn't follow the directive. He was thinking, man, I do have my hands behind my back. And finally he tased the guy, he collapses, and he's repeatedly tasing him, and he's dead. So, I know it's some more questions.
Right here. Yes, we're all good thinking adults, I think. And the stories that you tell, we're very sad over, and I understand. My son is married to a beautiful black woman. I was raised not to be bigoted, and I'm not.
I believe you.
And I have a friend that I helped her get a hip replacement for nothing because she's very poor, and I drive her to the grocery store. That's not my point. My point is, I took her to a black church so she would be comfortable, and the pastor, with young people sitting there, talked about everything that happened, all the murders, all the stuff that happened in the 60s and the 50s and before. And then I watched the young black men walk out there just really fired up. So my concern is that we need to talk about the future and how we can help each other, not the past.
Right.
Now, when you get pulled over, and I have been pulled over for speeding in the country in Montana. And so I put my arms, my hands, the officer's getting out of the car and he's walking up to the car. I put my wrists out, my arms out. He says, ma'am, I'm not gonna handcuff you. And I said, but I just want you to see my hands because I have a weapon in the car. Oh, where is it? And I said, it's sitting in the front passenger seat right there. I'm traveling by myself in Montana where there's not many people around. And I'm old.
You don't look old.
Anyway, so he said, well, get out of the car. Let's go up and visit. And And he didn't give me a ticket for speeding. He just said, slow down. But he wanted to see my gun. And he said, that's exactly the same thing that the lady highway patrolman's carrying. Because I couldn't shoot all the bullets with my nuts. Anyway, that's my point. I want to encourage everybody not to tell the horrible stories over and over to young people, especially your young sons, because it makes them want to go out and fight.
But can I say something to you? Because your statement is profound. And I sense that you are genuine and sincere. I believe everything you just told me. But one of the tragedies of where we are right now, we do want to move past the past. But at present, we're reliving it. We're reliving it. The same kinds of violence and the same kinds of stories that were told in the past are now newly lived by this generation. And they can't help, in many cases, but respond the way they do. We have to change what's happening on the ground between us in order for us to make the kind of change. And it's possible, but we have to do some things differently. I think I saw a hand over here.
Right over here with Miss Teresa.
Teresa Brown Foster. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to say, here in Kansas, especially Wichita and Sedgwick County, because Sedgwick County is the largest county in Kansas, Wichita is the largest city. And I'm proud to stand here to say, we have the best sheriff, Jeff Easter, in the state of Kansas.
That's good.
We have the best chief of police. We're so lucky to have him. He's brand new here, Gordon Ramsay.
Were they here? Were they here? All right. Very good.
And before Jeff Easter, we had another good sheriff, Gary Steve, right here, that worked with the community. Maybe Wichita and Sedgwick County is ahead of the cuff, but they do work with the community, and we love them. I believe probably Sheriff Jeff Easter and Sheriff Steve here probably know more blacks in the community than probably the black people do, because that's how much they work with them. I'm really proud of our city councilwoman. But we have community policing here. We have had it here for over 20 years under the United States Justice Department that we work with, but we see the individuals out in the neighborhood and the people working with the community. Neighborhood associations. We love to see our policemen and our sheriff within our neighborhood here in Wichita, Kansas, and in the black community. I just wanted to get that out there. And we love them. We love them over there. And we love our past ones also. But I do have one of the statements that I did have that the community wanted me to ask, and I'll read this to you. This is from off the social media. Many black people who become police officers become blue, not black. In order for you to survive in the police department, you take on the police department ideology, ways of life, and culture, said an NAACP representative. Now, could you address that?
I saw that in the media too. I'm not 100% certain as to the veracity of that statement, but as far as somehow you automatically forfeit your black card because you work for the police, well, that's foolishness. I mean, that's ignorant. Now, are there black officers who buy into some of the worst of what police culture can be? Yes, there are. I've seen them. I know some of them. Are there black officers who maintain their connection to the community they've come from and serve it from an empowered position in a very positive way? Yes, there are. I know some of them. So there's a mix in all of it. And let me throw something else out for food for thought while I'm on the topic. Controversial though it may be. But one of the things that you hear a lot when law enforcement people are standing in defense of law enforcement people and at the same time trying to acknowledge, at least on the surface, that there may be a problem, you hear this. Well, the vast majority of officers are good people or good officers. It's just that 1%. It's just that 1% that's causing the problem. Man, please, stop it. Stop. It's more than 1%. Let me give you an equation. Let me give you a formula that you can work with that is more grounded in reality. I have a colleague named K.L. Williams. He provided training to hundreds and hundreds of police officers in St. Louis. He wrote the use of force policy for St. Louis. He's trained officers all over the country and internationally in use of force. He's well versed in use of force and police culture. And he says this: on any given day in a major city anywhere in America, on any police department in any one of those major cities, you will have 15% of your officers who will do the right thing all the time, no matter what, whether anybody's looking or not. You will have 15% of your officers who will abuse their authority at every opportunity they get, your rights, your property, whatever. That leaves 70% of your department. And what he says is that 70% that remains can go either way, depending on who they're with, depending on the circumstance, depending on whose influence they fall under. And unfortunately, we've seen too many times, not just based on my experience, but the experience that I've heard in dialogue with colleagues across the country, that 15% on the negative exerts an outsized influence on the culture of the entire department. These are the real police. When I worked in St. Louis in the 3rd North Patrol, 8th District, on the building outside of it, at the top of it, it says, home of the real police. When I come out of the station, I'm coming out of the home of the real police. You know what that euphemism meant? Yeah, we'll bust your head. This is, you come through this part of St. Louis, this is where the real police are. You better straighten up, right? So that 1%, and it's just these few, what a tragic reality that would be if as a nation we have allowed 1% of any population to wreak this kind of havoc on our society and the framework of our democracy. That would be an indictment of us.
I'm going to ask a question. I don't always do this, but a few years ago, my husband and I and our 2 kids got pulled over out in the suburbs for speeding, and the motor was broken on our window in my car, and so my husband opened the door to hand his information out, but he did it before the officer got right up to the door, and the officer approached us rapidly and made it clear very quickly we were not to open our door and that he would take it from there, and our kids were frightened and I was a little taken back, but that was his responsibility and his job. Someone opens their door, something's going on. I can't get past your first story about the military guy who gets out of his car at a DUI checkpoint. That doesn't make sense to me. Who in their right mind thinks it's okay to get out of their car at a DUI checkpoint versus waiting for further instruction? Help me understand that.
I don't know, but I could bring the videotape of the interview that I did with him, and he may have explained it in there. But I think he wanted to expedite his movement, and I think he was trying to get to the airport, and I think that's what prompted him to try to speed things up. It was a decision that he made, and the result was what it was. But his longer experience with police, not just that night, but what he described on the videotape when we did the interview, was a whole history of harassment, really questions that go for us. I shouldn't say for us, I don't want to say anybody speaks for all black people. But for many of the people I know, what it goes to is a question of standing as human beings. What can you do to me that is of consequence to you if you do it? Here. Always keep the Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on my person, just a quirk. But Article 6, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. That's that's what it gets to, man. When you see Trayvon Martin, for example, 13-year-old kid. Let me show you some opposite realities, because your question is legitimate, but I think he just wanted to expedite his. When you see 17-year-old kid coming from the convenience store, wherever he bought some candy, headed to his house to finish watching TV, whatever he was watching, accosted by a guy who physically engages Trayvon while outweighing him by 100 pounds. I mean, by all accounts, George Zimmerman is a textbook coward. All of his opponents are women and children. Engages Trayvon Martin, ultimately kills him after receiving directives from the real police to leave him alone. Leave him alone. He persists and kills the boy. I see this brother here, my fraternity brother. I see this brother here. I see him. I see you. Question to you all. If one of these men that I just pointed out, anywhere, they found themselves in these United States, was following a 17-year-old white kid who had just come from the store, bought some candy, and was on his way home, and was talking about how he was going to engage him, and the police said, leave him alone, murdered him. Do you think he would be free today? Him, or him? I think not. I'm 100% sure that it's not. We live in the same country and in different realities, although our advertisement as to the place that we are, land of the free, home of the brave, equal treatment under the law, justice and liberty, ostensibly applies to all of us. It never has, not in the same way. We can get there, but there's been no point in our collective history as a nation. Anyone can dispute me if you like, but there's been no point in our collective history when there was a national consensus, 100% agreement per the American narrative that everybody here should be equally valued in every process that we have. There's always been, millions of people who would fight that idea in the courts, on the streets, wherever, who are opposed to that notion. And so you have young people now saying, man, I'm a human being. I don't have to prove that beyond the fact that I exist. And if I'm inside the law, if I'm abiding the law, then I want to be valued as such. Yes, sir.
We're pulling up on about, we got 2 minutes after. If you need to leave, because it's 1 o'clock, you will not hurt our feelings. We always get
It's Friday, it's Friday. What are you doing?
I know, but this group has a
Like you're going back to work.
That's right. So we will take 2 more questions. We'll stay about 5 minutes after. I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go up to Dewan, and then we'll probably need to get out of the package. Their space, we'll need to get out of their space.
So it seems like a lot of what our criminal justice system does is to process people who have been involved with what are now illegal drugs, whatever they may be. Does that have anything to do with great relationships between the police and the community?
Man, I'm glad you brought that up. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the disastrous drug policy that we've had here for the last several years. It's changing now, and many people believe, unfortunately, that it is changing now because the face of the users are changing with the new push of heroin into more affluent areas across the country. The approach that we take, the frame that we put on the issue as a health problem, a health concern, a crisis of health. And I think that's probably right. I think that we've spent a lot of time locking up people who had addictions and health issues, and were not criminals who were hurting people, but they were hurting themselves. And we flooded our prisons like that for a long time. And I think, it exacerbated things because a lot of times that creates more frequent contact between police and community people that result in those kinds of encounters where no relationship can be built because, yet again, here's a punitive encounter. Here's you in my face for whatever the reason. So if we change some of that policy, we could save a lot of money, first of all, on prison expenditures. And B, we could get people help they need it.
I think we'll go here, last one.
Well, first I want to thank Chief Ramsey and Sheriff Easter and DA Mark Bennett. I've been in relationships with all three of them. I don't know if that's the right kind of
Controversy erupts at the Pachyderm meeting.
working together. And so they've been very accessible for the law enforcement community and for me, who's been on the cusp of the whole Black Lives Matter movement here in Wichita locally. One of the things that, some of the things we agree on, other things we don't agree on, but they, like I said, they've been very accessible and open to listening to us. One of the things that I've seen as a frustration point, and luckily our police union has been willing to work with us on some of the issues, but I would like to hear your thoughts on what communities can do to push back against police unions who yield an enormous amount of influence and power over preventing people from being held accountable. What would your recommendations be for that?
That's a real challenge, and it's definitely a core issue across the country relative to police unions and their position. There's many of the police unions have been responsible for a lot of the policies and laws that protect officers from accountability, and they push hard for more every year. I think as a community, you can do what you've been doing, which is exercise your First Amendment right to challenge the system in any way that you deem necessary and which is lawful. And then your legislators, if you have any who are willing to accept the fact that some change may be needed in terms of producing a better result in the police-community relationship, that may be a route to go to, because it seems like some of these guys are so entrenched, man, like they feel like they're going to lose some ability to either enforce the law or the authority of law if they're ever in a position or take a position of holding somebody accountable who's violated the law while acting under the color of law. It's like, man, if we say this guy did this, then we all lose credibility. No, you don't. You gain credibility. You gain credibility when you hold one of your own accountable. We can see as a community, if you want to quickly, speedily improve police-community relations, start holding some guys accountable when they deserve it. And let the community see that. It wouldn't happen overnight, but if that becomes a consistent model, now you have the basis for a relationship. Now you have a basis for dialogue. I would submit to you that because of you all's ongoing dialogue that you just described, if something were to happen, you all are in a much better position than folks in maybe some other parts of the country to talk about it and come up with some kind of resolution. And to explain to each side what's really going on a foundation of trust and on a foundation of transparency. And that interaction is much more successful and meaningful and impactful than one that comes at the butt of a gun or the butt of a club. And now I have to talk to you about serious matters. After we get through interacting like that, I need you to trust me on this one. It doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that. So,
Redditt Hudson,
thank you all.
let's give him a good hand.